Hi everyone. Art consists of visual elements. So this week we are going to learn visual elements as fundamentals in art. So the visual elements has line, shape and mass, light, texture and pattern, space, color, and time and motion. Today we are going to see line, shape and mass, light, texture, space of the visual elements. So the first visual element we are going to see is line. A line is a path traced by a moving point. So there are three primary functions of line in art. The first function is to record the borders of form. And the second function is to describe surfaces and spaces. And the third function is to convey direction and motion. So let's see how it works. So there are two types of line in art. So first one is contour line, so which is the perceived line that marks the borders of an object in space. And the second one is outline, which is the edge of a space or figure depicted by an actual line drawn or painted on the surface. So let me show you how they are different in visual images. So they look different like this. So let's look at the contour line first, the left one. So as you can see, there is no defined line on the circle. However, we can easily recognize it. It is a circle with the shading. That calls contour line. On the other hand, so let's look at the right circle. So we can recognize a circle shape with the defined line. That calls outline. And there is an implied lines which are similar with contour line. An implied line is defined as a line that suggests the edge of an object or a plane with an object. The line may be broken by intermittent marks. It may be defined by value, color, or texture, or it may not be visible at all. So with any implied line, our brain interprets that the line must exist. So this is a powerful tool that any artist can use. So let's see the examples. So the left drawing has defined lines following the apples on line, right? And there is no defined line on the right apple. So however, our eyes can imagine the outline of the right apple image because of the chiaroscuro, which is a value mass drawing skill. That calls implied lines. And here are another examples of implied lines. So on the left drawing, there is defined line for the road. However, we can, there is no defined lines for the road, right? However, we can imagine there is a road by the vertical lines surrounding the road. Also, let's look at the right image. So this is a feather drawing with dots. So there aren't any lines in this feather drawing. However, the dots spread in the feather's shape. So we can imagine there is a feather. So that is implied line. Now, let's see direction and movement by lines. The direction of a line can convey mood. The first one is a sunset image with a horizontal line, and horizontal lines are calm and quiet in art. And the next is vertical lines. Vertical lines suggest more of a potential for movement in art. And the last one is a diagonal line. Diagonal lines strongly suggest movement and give more a feeling of vitality to a picture. So let's see this example. So this is a Peter Paul Rubens oil painting, The Raising of the Cross. And this is a Baroque style painting in 17th century. The Baroque art movement arose after the Renaissance during the age of colonial settlement. The Baroque's art dynamic, and its features show motion, emotion, turbulence, grandeur, and contrast. So can you guess which direction of line you can find in this painting? It's diagonal lines. Looks very dynamic, right? So in the central panel, we see the dynamic motion when the cross of Christ's crucifixion is being raised to its upright position. And Rubens created a strong diagonal emphasis by placing the base of the cross at the far lower right of the composition and the top of the cross in the upper left, making Christ's body the focal point. Now, we are going to see the second visual element, shape and mass. A shape is a two-dimensional form and a mass is a three-dimensional form. So a shape consists of width and height, just like the left square. And each shape within the image occupies an area within identifiable boundaries. And boundaries may be created by line. And a mass in the right image is a three-dimensional form that occupies a volume of space. It consists of width, height, and depth. And the shapes can be classified into two types: geometric shapes and organic shapes. Geometric shapes are composed of regular lines and curves, just like this images, circle, square, and triangle. However, organic shapes are made up of unpredictable, irregular lines that suggest the natural world. In art, we can divide an image as positive shapes and negative shapes to make contrast. So the positive shapes are the shape of the actual object, and the negative shapes are the shapes in between objects, which means the background. And sometimes it calls as figure and ground. So figure is the object part, like positive shapes. And the ground means background, like negative shapes. And like line, there is an implied space in art. An implied shape is a shape that does not physically exist, but is suggested through the psychological connection of dots, lines, areas, or their edges. So let me show you an example. So, I'm sorry, this is the first example. So which shape can you see in the center of the image? Triangle, right? So there was not a physical triangle shape in this image. However, you could recognize it by psychological connection of the edges. And that calls implied shapes. And here, we see another example. This is Raphael's painting, the Madonna of the Meadows. Raphael is one of the masters of Renaissance 16th century. And this oil painting was produced in 1505 in Venice. The Madonna of the Meadow exemplifies a religious theme. It depicts Mother Mary with Jesus Christ and John the Baptist. In this painting, Mary is guarding the two lovely children. And as you can see, the shape physically doesn't exist in this painting. It is our eye movement in the grouping of the figures, a geometric shape composition, and it was a popular device to provide unity during the Renaissance. Can you guess which implied the shape in this painting? It's triangle. And the third visual element we are going to see is light. Light is represented in works of two-dimensional art to define and describe figures and spaces. By using light, we can make a space and three-dimensional mass on the two-dimensional surface. Like other elements we just learned, light has implied light. And implied light means modeling mass in two dimensions. An artist uses light and shadow to model objects in two-dimensional works, meaning to give them a three-dimensional appearance. So this is a value scale in gray. Value is defined as the relative lightness or darkness of a color. So it is an important tool for the designers and artists in the way that it defines form and creates spatial illusions. So contrast of value separates objects in space, and while gradation of value suggests mass and contour of a contiguous surface. And this is an example to show implied light modeling mass drawing by Leonardo da Vinci from the Renaissance. There is no actual light, but we can feel there is a light in this drawing, right? So this technique calls chiaroscuro. That means light and dark. It is discovered and perfected by Italian painters during the Renaissance. With chiaroscuro, artists employ value lights and darks to record contrast of light and shadow in the natural world, contrast that model mass for our eyes. So one of the great masters of chiaroscuro was Leonardo da Vinci. For doing modeling mass, we can use these kind of drawing skills, hatching with a single direction drawing lines, or cross-hatching with multiple direction drawing lines, or stippling with dots drawing. And sometimes we can make modeling mass with a smudge technique. And now, we are going to see the fourth visual element in art, texture and pattern. So these are actual texture. Actual texture is literally tactile quality we can experience through touch. And there is a visual texture, and visual texture refers to an implied sense of texture that the artist creates through the use of various artistic elements such as line, shading, and color. So let me show you an example. So this painting, this is a painting. However, with the artist's excellent painting technique, we can feel the texture of the image. So the wood wall on the background and the little stuff on the shelf, so everything looks very realistic. And pattern is any decorative, repetitive motif or design in abstract ideas. So as such, the elements of a pattern repeat in a predictable manner. A geometric pattern is a kind of pattern formed of geometric shapes and typically repeated like a wallpaper design. And the fifth visual element is space. Sculpture, architecture, and all other forms with mass exist in three-dimensional space. That is the actual space in which our bodies also stand. So these works of art take their character form, the ways in which they curve out volumes of space within and around them. And the artist, like a sculptor and an architect, draw picture plan with implied space before they create actual piece of art. So we can make implied space with the linear perspective technique on the two-dimensional surface. So there are three implied space techniques. So first one is linear perspective. And the second one is foreshortening. And the last one is atmospheric perspective. So let me show you the examples one by one. So this is a linear perspective drawing skill. Leonardo da Vinci from the Renaissance discovered this technique to show a space on a two-dimensional surface. So the left one is 1 point linear perspective with vanishing point on the center of the implied space. So this is a good perspective technique for compacting many objects in a limited space. And this is the second element of the Renaissance perspective technique. So with foreshortening, artists can make the implied space more dynamic. Foreshortening is a technique used in perspective to create the illusion of an object receding strongly into the distance or background. The illusion is created by the object appearing shorter than it is in reality, making it seem compressed. So it is an excellent way to maximize the depth and dimension of paintings and drawings. And the third, perspective technique by Renaissance is atmospheric perspective. So it indicates that as an object recedes into the distance relative to the viewer, we see that object with reduced clarity, value, and color saturation. And so we are going to continue to see the rest of the visual elements in art in the next video. Bye.